Good morning, and thank you for joining today's webinar. Today, we will be talking about protecting data in a hybrid and remote world. My name is Michael Holden from Bytes. I'm pleased to be joined today by Stephen Nesbitt, a sales engineer from Varonis, who will be taking us through the bulk of today's presentation. Attendee lines will be on mute throughout the session. There will be a Q&A at the end, so please post any questions in the questions window, and I will field them during this Q&A. This is a purely strategic discussion. Any commercials can be discussed with your Bytes account managers after the session. Everyone will receive the recording after the session. Lastly, we have a feedback survey at the end of this presentation and would appreciate it if you took 2 minutes to complete it, as we use it to make sure that our webinars are still hitting the mark. Okay, my slides seem to have stopped moving. The agenda for today's webinar. Firstly, a short overview of Bytes. Then we'll move into the majority of the presentation from Stephen, which will include monitoring and correlating remote worker and data access activity and rapidly detecting potentially compromised home workers, which will be followed by a Q&A session. So, who are Bytes? We enable effective and cost-efficient technology sourcing, adoption, security, and management of software, hardware, and cloud services. Bytes have a wide range of expertise, including licensing and SAM, data management, and security. On the security side, we have a wide range of technology partners with the highest level of accreditations, with the majority of our vendors. We offer a variety of technical services, holding multiple accreditations and boast award-winning delivery, which we are extremely proud of. That's enough about us. Let's talk about protecting data. Stephen is a sales engineer from Varonis, who Bytes hold a gold partner status with. Varonis is a global market leader in data access and governance and are trusted by over 6,000 customers worldwide. We have invited Varonis to talk us through how to gain a clear understanding of the data you have, what most vulnerable data looks like, and who has access to it, no matter where the data resides or where it is being accessed from. That's over to you, Steve.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me just show my screen out. Okay, you should be seeing my slide, is that right?
Yes, we can see that. Thanks.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah, thanks, Michael. Thank you for the introduction. So just to reiterate, my name's Stephen Nesbitt. I'm a sales engineer and Office 365 specialist here at Varonis. I joined Varonis back in June of last year. Before that, I worked for Microsoft for 7 years as their lead technical specialist for Office 365. For a number of those, I also worked on Windows 10 and their enterprise mobility and security suite as a technical specialist. And I specialized mainly in the working in the enterprise sector for manufacturing, utilities and resources. And so I've been involved in taking some of the UK's largest companies from a largely on-premises environment to use it to Office 365. And my background before that was very much in the SharePoint and unstructured data management world.
I'm not, if I'm going to do this, because I've got...
Okay. So we're going to go through today a few different sections around protecting unstructured data as the sort of high-level theme. For the purposes of today, unstructured data really means data that's created by people and stored within a sort of non-database environment. So anything that's on a SharePoint site, a Windows file server, Linux or Unix, anything that's really, perhaps an Excel sheet, a Word document, or even emails, is going to fall under that category. We're really going to look through the challenges associated with unstructured data generally, and also the new world of work. So in particular, how the events of the last few weeks have accelerated some of the move to remote working and using SaaS-based services for virtual collaboration. We're then going to look at a data governance methodology that kind of underpins everything that we do here at Varonis. And finally, we're going to move on to both looking at expanding this visibility out from your on-premises up to the cloud and basically having a hybrid view of both. And lastly, finishing on securing the edge. And by the edge, what we're really talking about here is things like VPN, DNS, proxy, areas within the environment where we need to monitor to ensure that we're getting the fullest picture of what's going on. And we'll finish with questions, of course. So let's just take a look at challenges with unstructured data. And I'm hoping that most of these will be familiar to a lot of you. You know, we're not really trying to reinvent the wheel here. These are things that have existed for pretty much as long as unstructured data has existed within companies. And really, with Varonis, what we try and do is ask our customers if they can answer, you know, simple questions. You know, where is our sensitive data? And perhaps more fundamentally, what is sensitive to our organization? Some of our sensitive data is kind of forced upon us by various regulations, etc. In terms of things like GDPR, etc. But we also have sensitive data that is unique to each business. And it may be something as simple as an employee ID number, or something more complicated like a patent number, or an identifier for a particular technical piece of drawing, or whatever it might be. Do we have an understanding of exactly where it is and what it is? And also, do we have an understanding of who has access to that data and if that data is appropriate? And to be honest, if we don't have answers to those questions, it becomes very difficult then to have any sort of understanding of where it's most at risk. And this can be really problematic when you're looking to try and identify and stop threats to that data within the business. So when we look at compliancy and regulation, again, where is our regulated data? Well, some people have a bit of a view on this. GDPR coming in a couple of years ago kind of pushed this up to the top of the agenda. But for most organizations, while they've done the sort of bare minimum of identifying, certain parts of where they're processing most of their customer related data, they perhaps have a data protection officer now and some sort of, basic data subject access request. We're seeing that most organizations haven't taken it much further than that, and certainly haven't spent a huge amount of time understanding the rights and access that their employees or even external users have to that data, where it's processed most effectively, and how it's secured down to least privileged access. And ultimately, can I prove that this is my position by design? That whenever I create data, it is put into a place, or stored in a place, where only the right people can have access to it. Moving on, if we struggle with the answers to the first two sections, how do I detect something sophisticated like an advanced persistent threat, where either we have an insider who is compromising our data, or we have perhaps compromised credentials or ransomware that is inside our, either attackers inside our environment or software inside our environment that is threatening the data that we hold most dear. If we don't understand where that data is, what has access to it, who has access to it and what they're doing, it's very difficult to detect if anything falls outside of those patterns. And again, if we can't detect that, it's very difficult then to act quickly and decisively to limit the damage that any of these attacks can do. And finally, in this kind of high-level overview, remote working has kind of added an additional dimension. Now, a lot of organizations already had, a remote working policy, but what we've seen over the past couple of weeks, due primarily to the COVID-19 outbreak, is an explosion of home working. And that's led to a couple of things. The first one being is that virtual collaboration services, such as, say, something like Microsoft Teams, have gone from being, perhaps rolled out sporadically in the business in a more organized fashion to being literally vital for people to access their data and collaborate, quite simply because they're no longer able to be in the office together. Added to that, we're seeing an explosion in home working and therefore people connecting over VPNs. We've seen, companies investing heavily in being able to have their entire workforce work from home, whereas perhaps in the past their VPNs were scoped for maybe a third of users at any one time being able to log into that service. And so the question is, given the speed that this has happened, does any of this, has data security and the considerations around access, has that kept pace with this? So if we look at remote working, for example, as I said, we look at VPN increasing, we look at increased use of SaaS-based applications. And there may be issues, for example, where people haven't been able to get new laptops, they've been having to use older laptops, which perhaps aren't patched. They may not even be domain joined. They may be accessing Office 365 directly over the internet. Can they get that data from your online data store to that machine? And if so, is that secure? Microsoft Teams is the other side of this, and this is something that we're going to spend a little bit of time on today in today's webinar. And it really has seen an explosion of usage over the past month. It's pretty much doubled its footprint from around 22 to 30 million users to now over 44 million monthly active users. And effectively, it allows open collaboration across Office 365. And it's extremely easy for our users to be able to spin these Teams environments up within Office 365, start adding unstructured data in there, and basically that unstructured data is therefore being processed externally. Now, these pieces of unstructured data can be emails, they can be files in OneDrive, team files in SharePoint Online, for example, and Teams really gives you this ability to have a client which effectively gets all the best parts of Office 365 into one view. So when you create a team, you create that back-end SharePoint site. You create an Azure Active Directory and you create Office 365 groups underneath it. You create a routable email address. You link it to each individual team member's OneDrive for Business, as well as adding additional applications like Planner. And all of this is done in a flat permission structure. So what that basically means is when you create a team, by default, unless IT have made some changes, there are only two permissions levels, and that's owners and members. And what that basically means is any data that's pushed into that environment is visible to anyone in that team. And this leads to potential oversharing, particularly if you have external users or users who are from different departments in the business that may be in the team for one purpose, but actually are suddenly able to join for a different purpose. Microsoft have kind of tried to address this with the idea of private channels, within Teams. And basically this allows you to take a subset of the team members, say there are 10 members in a team, and create a channel within that team that has 5 members. Unfortunately, that creates another SharePoint site, which is actually invisible to the admin view of SharePoint. Any team can have up to 31 SharePoint sites back-ending it. And I'm sure I can tell you, you understand that if you have that many SharePoint environments over that many users, creation over that many teams, all of which have data being uploaded into them by design in a flat permission structure, the idea of oversharing and being able to monitor this is extremely important. And unfortunately, with the tools that come within Office 365, it can be quite challenging. So what have we looked at there? We've really looked at the understanding of unstructured data in the first place. What is it? Is it sensitive or not? And what does sensitive mean to our business? Who has access to it? And what are they doing with that access? And then if we understand that particular set of information, we can then start to think about: are we compliant? Are we, able to prove that compliance? And are we then able to see if something is outside of that environment? And finally, then we looked at how the move to remote working has kind of exacerbated a lot of these type of issues. So given that we understand kind of the problem around managing and protecting unstructured data, well, how do we begin to address it? Well, Verona starts with a particular approach, and that is, what if security started with data? So if you were to start a company, an organization tomorrow, and this was a high priority, what would you do? Well, the first thing you'd understand is you'd categorize and understand your unstructured data, and you know exactly where it lived and who had access to it. And because you knew that, you could spend a lot of time setting the right situation in place to monitor that for abuse, and you'd know that only the right people had access. And anytime anybody came in that wasn't on that list, you would be able to easily be notified of that, alert it, and remediate it as appropriate. We'd also have controls in place to automate and manage this process so that it didn't get out of hand. And as we created more unstructured data as we maybe the business has changed, as we added new companies, as we moved to the cloud, things would stay as secure as they were on day one. And this is where Varonis has kind of come up with this concept of an operational journey to enable an organization to take our framework, use these tools to address the questions that we talked about at the top of this webinar. And this is really about deploying the solution, understanding the data and classifying it. We then look to be able to alert on any erroneous activity that may appear around that data, but also connect this kind of warning into our larger SIEM environment. Obviously, there's probably going to be a process there where we have to fix the environment as well. So we go through, we remove global access, we get down to least privilege access for essentially everything, but certainly unstructured data. And we would also move towards a point where data owners under the transform heading would have far more responsibility than IT to who managed and was able to gain access to particular parts of data within the business. And finally, at the end of this, you would put as much automation in place as you could, because if you remove global access, for example, from a file share once, there's no reason to think that that will stay like that. You know, we need to keep on top of this, and Varonis is really looking to partner with organizations to work with them to ensure that the likes of overprivileged access, sensitive data that's overexposed, or sensitive data that's stale doesn't become a problem. And this is where the sort of data security platform comes in. So on the left-hand side, we connect to the data stores. So primarily in the conversation today, we're going to talk about Windows and Office 365, but we've also got a Unix and Linux box that we've got set up. But we can do this to, you know, any NAS boxes that you may have, SharePoint Online, Exchange Online, but also those same services on premises as well. This sort of hexagon in the middle details out the approach that I've mentioned a few times now. You start with content classification, you understand the data, and then you move clockwise around that. So you find out who are the users and groups, what permissions do they have to that sensitive data, and what are they doing with those permissions by mapping their access activity. We then take telemetry not only from the data stores themselves, so from Office 365, from Windows files, etc., but also from an Active Directory and Azure Active Directory. So we build up what we call a peacetime profile of what normal looks like for that user. The final piece we add, which is we'll come to at the end of the webinar, is then that perimeter telemetry about understanding things like VPN, DNS, and proxy logs, bringing them in, wrapping this all in the context of a user and understanding their behavior around your unstructured data. If we can do that, we can then begin to address the use cases that we started this presentation with around the data protection, compliance, threat detection and response, and remote working. The idea being that if anybody comes over to you with a question that you started off with where is my unstructured data, you're only a report away from being answered. Where is my sensitive unstructured data? You're only a report away from being able to answer that question. So hopefully that kind of sets the scene. What I wanted to show now is a little bit about what this looks like within the actual Varonis dashboard. So what you can see here is kind of a demo environment that we use to talk to our customers. Let me just minimize that down a little bit. It's a little bit too large. Sorry, make sure I can get it in the whole screen. So basically what we have here is an environment where we can see the alerting dashboard, which we could sort of talk to in terms of, you know, these are the top level alerts that are coming in within the environment. What I wanted to actually look at was actually the file servers. So these file server widgets that you'll see on the screen here, these are primarily designed to allow you to have understanding at a high level of what unstructured data looks like within your business. So for example, we have sensitive information here. We also have, sorry, I'm struggling to find my scroll bar. We also have, sorry, hang on a sec. I'm just going to swap screens because this isn't working on the main screen. Just bear with me a second. One. Michael, has that swapped screen?
That has swapped screen. That has indeed.
Apologies for that. It's just it wasn't allowing me to scroll up and down. So back to what I was saying. So basically, when we look at the file servers here within the organization, what we want to do is start to get a high level view of some of the understanding that we talked about before. So what are these widgets are designed to do is for every resource that we've connected to, we've then got a particular widget on here that gives you some context-rich understanding of what's happening. So for example, here we have sensitive files with open access. So this is the amount of files that have hit our sensitivity, and that could be the out-of-the-box rules that we give you around GDPR, PCI, etc., or it could be rules that you've created yourselves around particular unique identifiers for your business. The idea here is that we can see very quickly the number of sensitive files, but we can also look at a timeline in terms of trend, whether this is something that's going up, as in more sensitive information is open to everyone. And by open to everyone, I mean the everyone group or the authenticated users group is applied to that file share location. And we can see that sensitive information is either increasing or in this case, decreasing dramatically, and we can see, the trend that's happening here. We can also decide, okay, what I really want to do is actually view what these are. So I can actually drill down into what those sensitive files actually look like. And this kind of reporting is absolutely invaluable if you get things like, for example, audit reports where people want to understand exactly where a type of unstructured data, sensitive unstructured data, is within the environment. I'm working with a customer at the moment where they have particular needs to do that around the defense sector. What I can do here is you can see that I have a particular path for those objects. I can see which file they're in, but I can also filter this around specific data points. So in this case, I'm going to look at actually where is the most unstructured data that's open to everyone within my Windows file estate or my file share estate. I think there's a Unix box on here as well. And as you can see, most of it is in this top level view here. So my share, legal, corporate, NDA, mutual NDA, I've got a whole bunch of data that is open to everyone and sensitive. And so this is something that enables me to then prioritize. If I want to go away and remediate some of this access, I know where to start. One of the biggest problems with managing unstructured data is it looks like a huge needle in a haystack type exercise, and the haystack just keeps getting bigger every single day. And actually knowing where to start is actually a huge part of this. We really need to understand exactly where we want to prioritize our efforts. Now, these widgets can be quite context specific. And one of the other things that we're able to look at as well, which we didn't touch on quite so much in that opening, was the amount of stale data that we have. Now, stale data can mean a lot of things to a lot of different people, but in context with what we mean here, we're really talking about data that has not been accessed for a period of time, 6 months, a year. You can obviously set this yourselves. But the idea being is if a piece of data is stale and it has been attributed as such, there is a Gartner study to say that there's a 95% chance that data will never be used again. So it makes sense to be able to move that data out of areas within the organization that are experiencing high processing. So, for example, your primary share, get that data moved off to a location that is far more locked down, maybe has admin access only, and maybe just stub out the fact that has happened. So if a user navigates to that location on the off chance, they've got that 5% chance of actually doing so, they look for a specific file, they have the understanding of exactly what to do to get to that piece of information. This is vital if you think about things like ransomware, or you think about things like insider threats, where if in a ransomware attack, any compromised credential can go out, find anything that is open to the everyone group, whether it be sensitive or not, and encrypt that data. We at Varonis want to minimize that risk. We want to get rid of those global access groups. We want your ACLs to be down to least privileged access, and we want you to be able to manage and monitor that effectively. These widgets, by the way, are quite customizable. So I've got a set number on here as well. But for example, I can go out here and just find out exactly how many sensitive files I have in total. So maybe, global access in my particular case isn't what I'm interested in. What I'm interested in is the number of sensitive files that actually are available within the organization as it stands. And as you can see, we've got over 4,000 in this particular demo environment. Again, we can look at what those files are, and we can look at where they are, as well as the trend. So we can start to see where the sensitive data is increasing. These dashboards are absolutely fantastic for giving particular stakeholders within the business, whether it be IT, legal, security, a really quick resource to go and click on and understand what is happening within the data within their organization. We can do a similar thing for directory services as well. So in directory services, we're not looking obviously so much at unstructured data, but we're looking at risks within the environment. And some of these are quite easy to fix, right? For example, you have simple ones like, for example, we've got here, no password policy. This doesn't mean there's not necessarily a password, it just means that the password can be anything. And obviously, if we're thinking about things like advanced persistent threats or brute force attacks, we obviously want to enforce complex passwords within the organization. Or if you talk to Microsoft, get away from passwords altogether and use, more modern ways of authenticating to the device, like perhaps Windows Hello. We can move up to something more advanced, of course, like, for example, admin accounts with service principal names. And these are services which you can obviously request the Kerberos token for, which also have admin rights. And if you can take that Kerberos token offline, you can crack it. You've then got a service account with admin rights that you know the credentials for. And that's a danger within the organization that you can easily mitigate. Again, there may only be 3 of these. We can tell you exactly what they are, but you need to have these dashboards continually running to ensure that these things aren't set up again in the future. I should say, by the way, that everything that we're showing here is alertable as well. So you can build out custom alerts and reports. So if you want to know the next time anyone creates a folder which contains certain amounts of sensitive data, we can set up alerts to tell you that, and you can receive obviously emails or any other form or multiple other forms of notification that that's happening. A couple of other things before I jump back to the slides are, not only can we look at this kind of information on file shares, but we can look at it on things like SharePoint Online as well. In this case, we're looking at some things that are similar, so number of sensitive files, for example, but we're not looking as much around global access, because the concept of global access in SharePoint is obviously slightly different. What we are concerned about here, though, is we're looking at things like, for example, number of sensitive files shared publicly. So we want to understand where anonymous access links have been sent out, and those links point to files or folder locations that contain sensitive data. We can also do the same thing for external sharing as well, and we can do this around OneDrive for Business as well. The final thing it's worth noting is we have also got a view here that wraps everything together. So all the information across every location that we're monitoring that contains GDPR data. So if you have a data protection officer, someone like that who is interested in getting a high level view of this, this dashboard can be really useful for them as well. So let me just dip back to the slide deck for a second. Let's get rid of that. That should be Michael. Can I just confirm that's flicked over?
Yes, it has.
It has. Okay. So the next part I wanted to talk to, we kind of touched on there a little bit, but also talking about understanding, extending management and visibility to the cloud. And the cloud in this case, we're going to talk about a little bit more about Office 365. So Varonis has a few sort of key messages that we like to take to organizations, which really we think are vital when you start to think about data protection within Office 365. The first one is preparing for the cloud. Now, most organizations have some Office 365 presence, but they may have large amounts of unstructured data that are still on premises. The same messages apply here that we've kind of been talking about for the whole of this presentation, really, is that if you have a well-structured and understood unstructured data methodology on premises, that will translate easily to the cloud. In my career at Microsoft, I spent a lot of time moving people from one place to the other, and I've seen every type of migration to Office 365, from literally we're not taking anything and it's a new greenfield site and anything you create up there will be from there and your data on premises will remain, to we're just going to take this file share and drop it into someone's OneDrive and take advantage of the unlimited storage, which usually is against the licensing terms. But I've seen basically every extreme and every sort of approach in between. The best practice, though, however, is that you spend time understanding the data on premises in the way that we've talked about throughout this presentation. We define the right set of permissions and structures in SharePoint and Online Microsoft Teams, define the correct set of sharing policies before the data is moved. One of the main reasons for that is SharePoint as a platform really doesn't like being reorganized. It's not a simple process to say take a whole SharePoint site which has unique permissions associated to it and then re-platform it, move the data around to somewhere else. And so you can save yourself a lot of time and effort by doing this piece of work on premises first, removing the stale data, archiving that off, identifying any data from a sensitivity perspective that isn't cloud ready for whatever reason, whether that be regulatory or geographical or just you just don't feel right about doing it, and getting that sort of understanding first before that data moves to the cloud. The final piece that we want to sort of major on, though, is implementing effective classification and labeling. And this is where Varonis is actually partnering with Microsoft to use our classification in line with Azure Information Protection. So Azure Information Protection, for those of you who don't know, is part of Microsoft Information Protection, which you get with your E3 or E5 licensing. In either case, Varonis is able to synchronize into the labels that you create for Azure Information Protection in the cloud. And our classification on premises, which is far more advanced than the sensitive information types that you get with Office 365, enables you to understand your sensitive data and then automatically apply those labels. And those labels, as you can see on the screen, are actually created in the Azure platform. Now, these labels are actually interesting because what they do is they actually write a metadata string, a unique label ID, into the document metadata itself. And so that persists with the document as it's moved around the organization or even emailed out. And we are utilizing Azure Information Protection rather than our own labeling because the actual experience for a user is fantastic. When a label is applied to a document, that can drive all manner of additional value in clients like Office. So you can see exactly what the label is, you can see what rights that confers, and you can get a really good understanding of why a particular document you may have opened has been classified in a particular way. So Varonis and Microsoft are actually partnering. We're bringing advanced classification and utilizing the labeling that Azure Information Protection provides to provide a complete solution for both on-premises and in the cloud to enable you to accurately classify and label your documents. The great thing about this as well is if you're using other parts of the Microsoft stack, which you get with your E3 and E5 licensing, such as rights management services, data loss prevention, Microsoft Cloud App Security, all of these can work and function off those labels. However, none of them work effectively if the classification is not accurate. And that is where we see Varonis having a really strong play here. We want to go out and accurately classify all your data wherever it is and enable you to get those labels applied to that data. Once they are applied to that data, you've then got a really strong set of tools from Microsoft to be able to protect that data if it leaves the organization, protect it from leaving the organization, and just manage and map what is happening to it within the Office 365 space. The second piece as well is more around hybrid considerations. So again, most organizations have some Office 365 presence now, but very few are fully migrated to the cloud, as in every single file and process is happening not on premises anymore, but in Office 365. We do have the ability within Varonis rather uniquely to be able to classify information in both environments, but also monitor and manage the events and alerts that are happening across both, as well as track people's access across information in both environments. So if I want to see, for example, where a particular user has access to a certain data type, maybe it's a unique identifier that you have in your business, but I want to report on that across Microsoft Teams, OneDrive for Business, SharePoint Online, and my on-premises filers, Varonis can do that from one report. And without having a tool like Varonis, being able to track a user's activity and movement and data access across a hybrid view is extremely problematic. So getting back to Microsoft Teams for a second, what I wanted to do was take a little look at what Microsoft Teams looks like within an organization. Now, hopefully most of you have used or are at least aware of Microsoft Teams. And in this scenario, I just wanted to introduce a few actors that will play a minor part in the demonstration that I'm going to get to in a second. But basically what this is a pretty standard Teams use case, which is you have a bunch of people who work for the finance team headed up by Amelia, someone who works for HR but is actually internal to the business, as well as Margaret, who's an external lawyer. And all these people have basically been added to a team that's been created to create a compensations package around a particular use case. So as we said, creating the team is dead easy. It's a couple of clicks. Most organizations, and again, I'm saying that a lot because it's a bit of a qualifier, but I've not seen a lot of organizations that have spent much time in stopping people creating teams, or at least adding any sort of templates to that. So in this case, as with the majority of teams I've seen created, it gets spun up, everyone gets added either as an owner or a member, or in Margaret's case, a guest, and they have pretty much access to everything that is dropped into that team from an unstructured data perspective. And so that's great. It's fantastic. It's a brilliant collaboration space. And as we said around the top of this, because of everything that's happened with the coronavirus outbreak, it's probably more vital than ever that we have this ability. However, there are a whole host of permissions visibility challenges and issues that come with utilizing Microsoft Teams. I'm not going to go through all these now, but ultimately there is no single place to understand who has access to even a single team. So you have to go to multiple different locations: Teams admin, SharePoint admin, the SharePoint backend permissions of the actual Teams site that's been created, as well as Azure Active Directory, to try and piece together who has access to that particular team. Delve and tools like search mean that if you do have over permissive access, it's even easier to see the information that you have access to that perhaps you shouldn't. And the addition of tools like OneDrive for Business, for example, means that there are additional data storage locations which come into play when files are shared through, for example, the chat. The sharing settings are actually quite complex as well. And this is primarily because of the fact that these are set at either the tenant or the site or the site admin level. And if you're sharing tenants with your parent organization, for example, you perhaps don't have control over whether external sharing is turned on or off. This can be very confusing and very complicated, and also is very easy to set incorrectly. And it's really not fair to blame users for kind of oversharing when your primary collaboration environment is so open by design. And so it's really important that when you look at Office 365, you're able to actually have a tool that enables you to drill down into actually what is happening, because this is difficult enough with one team. It's really hard with 10. But if you think about what we talked about earlier on, which is the amount of SharePoint sites that can be created per team, 31, and if we assume that a user creates one team a month, that's 12 teams a year per user per 5 to 10 SharePoint sites. You can soon see how you suddenly end up in the thousands of environments that you need to manage and check. And so Varonis is really keen on enabling you to have a better way of managing this environment. So what I want to do quickly is just flick back to my my second screen here. I'll go to my virtual environment. Just put my thing back on. Oops. Hopefully you can see that. Okay.
Yep.
My virtual environment. Fantastic. Let me just get rid of my controls. And so in this particular example, I've got a different demo environment, which is very much designed to showcase the strength of Varonis around our Office 365 view. So first of all, we've got a whole bunch of things, alerts that have fired around, certain alerting that we've understood for Office 365. So we have, for example, files shared externally from OneDrive for Business, files shared externally from Office 365, unusual geo-hopping, which we understand from our telemetry around Azure Active Directory and Active Directory. But what we also have here as well is a whole bunch of analytics that we can pull out to understand what is going on when specific teams are created. So when Amelia created the team, and hopefully you remember Amelia was the person in our compensations team who actually set this up, a whole bunch of events have fired. And what you can see here is an exact view of, per a specific time period, what has actually happened to there. So we can see exactly who's been added, where they've been added, what permission they've been given, and the types of users at a very high level that have been added. So we've had group member exactly, and one user. And that user, if you might recall, is our external party, Margaret. And so that's very easy to sort of look at, okay, this is the operation that has happened by Amelia within that particular time frame. And if we go in here, what we're able to do is add a whole host of other refiners around users, devices, resources, etc., etc. And we can go in and build out and save these queries as I've done here to give you a full understanding of exactly what's happening within your environment. So if we understand a little bit about what's going on, and we can clearly see all of the information, all the things that have happened within the compensation group as well, what we can also look at is actually what's going on the SharePoint side. So we can see that not only have we added the users, we've also added a whole host of additional permissions. And we can also see that actually at the same period, another site was created in terms of bonuses as well. And so we can drill down into what those permissions are. So again, within one single report, I'm able to find out exactly what is going on within the organization, and we can see all the different permissions that I'm able to view here, and basically see every time everything is happening within that specific team environment. Again, getting back to our theme, why is this important? Well, it's important because what we need to understand is which ones of these sites contain that sensitive information that we're so keen on protecting. The final piece as well is we'll look at exactly what's happened in terms of the site. So these are the sites and locations and folders, etc., that have been created underneath those site structures. And again, we can see the event type, files have been opened, modified, and we can start to cross-reference this with our sensitive information if we so desire. So what we can also do then is when we understand, right, that the compensations group was created, we can then go into the Data Advantage client. And this is the client where instead of looking at a high level view in terms of reporting and analytics, we're actually going to do some actual work in terms of looking at what's going on. So unlike, for example, the native Office 365 tools, in here, I have a really good understanding of exactly how many sites I have, and this hit count here tells me exactly the amount or the number of hits of sensitive data that have been found in each of these sites. So in my particular demo here, I'm actually interested in this compensation site, but actually I'd probably be more interested in bonuses, because if you see up there, bonuses is by far and away the largest concentration of sensitive data in my team's environment. But for the sake of this demo, let's take a look at compensation, because that's our team. Now, if I click on my documents folder, which is obviously where the sensitive data has been held by default, I can get a full view of everyone who has access to that and how their access is conferred, and also what controls they have within the environment as well. So I don't get blindsided by those same Office 365 permission holes that we talked about before. Now, what I can see here is I can see Amelia, who obviously created it, and she added in the whole host of other finance teams, and we've also got our members from HR as well. But we've got Margaret here as an external named user within Azure Active Directory. So Margaret works for a different organization, but effectively she's now she's an external user within this view. And I can navigate down into my documents folder here, for example, and I can see actually in the bonuses and general folder, there's a whole host of data in there which does contain information. Now, Margaret, if I click on her, has now I can easily see access to all of that information in there, whether she was supposed to or not. So she's been invited into a team. These things have been added with sensitive data in there. And it's entirely possible that she was only there to review, for example, the employee agreement with Alison. You know, that's what she was doing as an external lawyer. But actually, just by virtue of being in the team, we've got an overexposure risk to both the payroll white paper and the test document here, which contain various levels of unstructured data which are sensitive, and we can see the sensitivity of that here. In this case, we've hit the Sarbanes-Oxley and PII rules. And that's just a good example of where Margaret has over permissive access within this particular view. The nice thing about Varonis is I can click on any user and get an understanding of where their access is. Well, maybe I'm concerned about Margaret now. You know, maybe I'm worried that Margaret has got too much access within my environment. So what I'm going to do is go over to my reporting and actually run a report around my external user access report. Let's get rid of that for a second. Now, what I can see here is all the external users links that have been created in my demo environment. And I can go down here and I can see, oh, look, there's Margaret as part of the compensation members, but actually she's also got an external link to James Shoemaker's OneDrive. And you can see it's OneDrive because it's mysharepoint.com. So again, this is something that I might want to look at. So I'll close up my SharePoint and I'm going to take a look at my OneDrive. Obviously, if we had more users than this, you just search for the specific users and get a more rationalized view, or there's a number of different filters and views that you can do to minimize this down. But again, we've got James's document folder here. And at a click, you can see that because I'm still selected as Margaret, I can see that she now also has access to files within the controllers, customers, and this employee bonuses folder as well. And that was something that was extremely hard for me to tell just by using the Office 365 tools. I would have had to have known that would have happened with in James's environment, and it's very, very difficult for me to track Margaret's access across multiple different locations, multiple different teams, as well as OneDrive. I can also, because Margaret has the same identity on premises as well, I can run the same report against my filers, against my Linux box, against anywhere else that Margaret's identity, which again, is being managed by Azure Active Directory, has access to any on-premises by virtue of being replicated back into that on-premise environment. So let me just flick back to my other screen for a second. I'm nearly close to finishing off here, but hopefully that was useful in terms of seeing the data governance. Ultimately, what we want to do is we want to enable you to use Microsoft Teams in the way that it was designed. And the way that it was designed was to be an open and easy to use platform for users. We are working with Microsoft to give you the tools to enable that effectively. The analogy I always like to use, and it's a little bit tortured, but bear with me, is if Teams is a bit like the Wild West, all sorts of things going on, data being pushed all over the place, what you need is a sheriff, and Varonis is like that sheriff. The sheriff doesn't tell the town what to do, the town sets the rules, and the sheriff makes sure they're enforced. And Varonis has the power to be able to do that both Office 365 and on premises as well. We are working with Microsoft, so we're not competing with their E3 or E5 offerings at all from a security perspective. We're just giving you additional tools that plug those gaps, ensuring that you can feel that you can push data out to Office 365 securely and effectively. And given the situation we're all in terms of working from home and remote working, that matters now more than ever. One more point before I just move on to the security piece is we also offer the idea of remediation around links. So if you have a situation where, and I've seen this a lot in customers, where you look at a particular resource that is sensitive, you open it up and you find out that it's been shared and that there are multiple hundreds, if not even more sharing links that have been associated to that particular document. Varonis will actually look at whether those links are being used, whether the actors who own those shared links fit the profile of people who normally would have access to that kind of data based upon our understanding of the account and our machine learning at the back end and user behavioral analytics, and we'll actually recommend where those links will be removed. And in this way, we can again get down to least privilege access not only on premises, but also by doing the same thing in Office 365 by getting rid of those links that are no longer required. Final thing I want to touch on just before I finish is securing the edge. Varonis is a cybersecurity platform for unstructured data, and cybersecurity is a big part of that particular portion. We touched on the alert dashboard a little bit earlier on, but we're looking to try and get you to a point where the alert dashboard is 100% useful, and we're trying to get down to 1 alert per million events, ultimately. So how do we alert? Well, first of all, we collect and manage data from multiple repositories, which we've already been through, whether it's the data and events on the resources or the actual alerts at the edge. We enrich that with a whole host of additional data that we collect, whether it be the classification of the files, the geolocation, information we have around threat intelligence, etc. And then the real power comes in with our organizational learning, our user behavioral analytics, to add all of this enrichment and our understanding around what a user normally does to a particular alert. And this is really important because one of the big problems with cybersecurity generally is having too much information. You've just got too much stuff going on, too many alerts, too many raw logs. What Varonis is trying to do is get context-rich alerting either to our dashboard or to your SIEM environment in order for you to be able to actively access and process those. And it's really, really important that we are able to do that effectively so that you have the most ability to be able to manage and deliver those. So just very quickly, I'd like to stop there and maybe open it up for questions, if that's okay, Michael, because we've got a few minutes left.
Yeah, that's perfectly fine. So if you do have any questions, please do post them into the questions bar at this time. We don't have any at the moment. So for now.
Well, in that case, I'm going to do a little demo. Just
all right.
Give me a second.
And while the demo is going on, then if we could have any questions that do pop into your head, post it into the questions bar and we'll present them just afterwards.
Yeah. So I'll just flip back to my other monitor. So from an edge perspective, then what do we have? Well, we have the ability to be able to show alerts on specifically just on the edge products. So in our case, the edge is VPN, for example, or DNS and proxy. So instead of looking at alerts that are fired off everything, we can actually drill down and just take a look at, say, for example, what's fired on the proxy. And we'll see if there's anything come up from that. It's going to take a second to load. And as we can see that instead of looking at assets that have alerted, we're then looking at particular alerts that are fired via edges monitoring of the proxy. So in this case, we've got abnormal behavior, unusual amount of data was uploaded. Now this is an exfiltration event, and I can drill down into what that looks like. So I can start to see, okay, that this is the proxy that it was alerted on, and this is the time, date, stamp, etc. The alert has obviously been pushed up to high because obviously we're not seeing this kind of behavior normally. And what I can do then is drill into the alert details. So start to get an understanding of why this happened. The alert info is critical. We've obviously mapped it to the kill chain around exfiltration, and we can open up exactly why that is fired. You can then go down through the summary to the users and data to understand a little bit more around why this happened. So it's an IT admin account. It's not on the watch list, but it is privileged, and it's triggered 3 alerts in a specific time period. So that's kind of like a threshold event that we're also firing on as well. And up here, we can then go to the actual alerted events themselves. So we can drill down into exactly what happened. So it looks like we're accessing via proxy. We're trying to move some data and information up in the case there, and we can go down and look at the various different refiners as well. We can do the same thing here as well if we just want to look at, for example, our VPN. So again, we can turn these off. We could take a look at, for example, what's happening from our Pulse VPN over a specific time period, run that across here. Oh, and nothing was found. Let's try the DNS as well. Maybe we need to open up the back end, maybe open it up a little bit. So we're not seeing events. Maybe we see events instead on those. But you can hopefully see how easy it is for me to just filter and manage and save these results as I feel like. The alerting is really designed to give you sort of out of the box or customized alerting that we put into place for you to use from day one. What these kind of queries are allowed you to do is literally build out your own, so we can see exactly what is happening from a DNS perspective, exactly over a specific time period. The idea is we can start with the alerting, but if you want to build out your own investigations, you can do that. As I said within the environment, within the presentation, we can feed this information into the SOC and SIEM environments as well. So let me flip back to my desk, top. And I think that's pretty much what we wanted to cover. In terms of alerting, what we're really looking to do is support the alerts that you already have. So you're probably going to have a bunch of things that are alerting on AD. You may have E5 from Microsoft, which is providing some capability. Varonis is supporting that through our understanding of user behavioral analytics and our market-leading understanding of the unstructured data within your business. We're not looking to replace anyone. We're looking to add color and alerting into a wider SOC or CMIC environment in order to make sure that your security professionals are getting the best alerting possible. And because of our unique ability to understand the unstructured data and classify it so effectively, we can really do this with a lens of protecting the most important assets that you have in your business. And answering that question, is our data safe? What we then would do with our clients is take a look back at this operational journey, look at all the products and all the services that we've talked about and map them to those 6 stages. So work with yourselves to understand where you are in that cycle, whether it be on-prem or in the cloud. Which of these tools are appropriate in terms of is your problem global access? Is it mainly sensitive data, lack of understanding of sensitive data? Is it alerting and secure? And you have just too much in your scene that you can't make sense of? We'll work with an organization to understand that, and then we'll put you on this operational journey to ensure that wherever you are, you end up in a situation where these risks are managed and effectively as automated as possible through the course of using the Varonis products. So that's all I had. Obviously, if there are any questions, now's a good time to ask.
So there haven't been any questions that have been posted yet. So if I just want to say then thank you to Stephen for taking the time to present to us, and then thank you to everybody else who has attended this session. We know that it's tough to take some time out of your day to attend these, so we do really appreciate it. I think if there are any questions at this point, if you could email them to tellmemore@bytes.co.uk, and I will ensure that they do get answered for you at any time, or as soon as possible, rather. Thank you very much, and goodbye. Have a good day.
Thanks, everyone.